This is World to Win, bringing you the latest news and analysis from a socialist perspective.
Welcome back to World to Win, everyone. Unfortunately, it's just going to be me today. Yara had to fly back home to visit her family. She's dealing with a really tough situation right now. So if everyone can just send their love and messages of solidarity to Yara, I'm sure she would greatly appreciate it. But we have a very special episode today of World to Win. Now, we've been talking for weeks and months even about the situation of the Socialist Alternative City Council member Kshama Sawant in Seattle, and the fact that she was experiencing a recall campaign against her. And we've talked extensively about why the right wing was really trying to recall her after building movements to win a $15 minimum wage, building movements to tax the richest business in the world, Amazon, and currently building movements for rent control and renters' rights in Seattle. But we have some really exciting news, and we have Kshama here herself to talk with us today. So Kshama, thank you so much for taking time out of your extremely busy last couple of weeks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Toya.
So let's just get right into it, Kshama. I know everyone is dying to hear about the results. But first, before we get into that, just in case someone isn't familiar with the recall campaign, can you just quickly talk about what has been going on for the past couple of months?
Yes, as many of the listeners might have already heard, we faced a recall threat from the right wing, and in fact it was a racist right wing big business backed recall. Big business backed because we clearly tens of thousands, in fact now $1 million from mostly big business people, wealthy people, corporate landlords backing the recall, and it was clearly part of an attack overall nationally on the Black Lives Matter movement. But of course, in Seattle, our Socialist City Council office has posed an undeterred threat to big business interests. We have won the $15 minimum wage, we won the Amazon tax last year, and we have won a whole host of renters' rights. And it's clear to them that we are neither going to be selling out nor are we going to be marginalized. And so every election has been a massive fight for us against the Chamber of Commerce, against Amazon, and against big business. But when they were not able to stop our re-election in 2019, they went after us with this recall. And the votes are still being counted, but most of the votes having been counted, it looks like we have defeated this recall.
That is so exciting to hear. I mean, Seattle does have an interesting voting system in that, ballots are mailed in, so we will see the numbers change over time. But we can tell, so far it looks like we are, in the clear for a victory. So that's very exciting, especially considering, the fact that this really was a right-wing attempt to take a democratically elected, working class representative out of office with the amount of voter suppression that they were using, the fact that, 100 and some odd Trump donors even.
Actually, in fact, 500 plus Republican donors and more than 130 Trump donors. I mean, it is staggering. It's so blatantly right wing. And as you mentioned, Toya, the voter suppression, having this election sandwiched between two of the major traveling holidays in the United States, it was geared towards marginalizing, disenfranchising as many working class voters as possible, as many renters and communities of color as possible. And it has to be mentioned, Toya, that it wasn't just a recall campaign with big corporations and the right wing backing it. Really, every institution under capitalism has colluded to try and have this recall succeed, including the Washington state recall law, which is set up in such a way that does not target establishment politicians, but goes after working class representatives, and the Washington state Supreme Court, which took over 3 months to deliver their ruling, which has never happened. It is unprecedented, which paved the way for the recall campaign to delay their ballot from the November election to this unusual December election. In fact, this is the first December election that people have heard of in Seattle.
Well, they're just pulling out all the stops, the special election, the Republican donors, but they still didn't succeed. we're assuming that the trend is going to continue that, we've defeated the recall, but they didn't succeed. So, why is that? Because, we see elections happen across the country where, really working class candidates or progressive candidates or, candidates on the left try to run, campaigns, and they are defeated oftentimes by the right. So what made this campaign, the Kshama Solidarity campaign, different? Why was it able to succeed?
The reason we were able to succeed was the paramount understanding that the last thing you should do when the right wing and when big business go on the attack is to dull down your political position. So we did the opposite of what the conventional rule book in politics tells you. We refused to back down from any of our positions. We first of all, we boldly exposed what this recall attempt was. When the corporate media, when the Seattle Times editorial board, when all these political pundits, including the right-wing commentators, talked about the recall, they made it appear as if, it's all smoke and mirrors. They made it appear as if I have broken the law and that they don't have political differences with me, but this was all about one person doing something criminal, something wrong, and that's why we want her out. This is all mythology, and we had the courage to explain that clearly and relentlessly to the working people of District 3 and really to everybody in the political framework who's listening. Young people around the nation have been paying attention, and we've been making it very clear that this has nothing to do with these trumped up charges. This has everything to do with political attacks against our working class and successful council office. It has everything to do with the right wing and big business desire to have a do-over of the election that they didn't win in 2019. And on top of all of that, this is a racist attack because it is specifically going after the Black Lives Matter movement. We've seen the tens of thousands of attacks on peaceful protesters nationwide, including arrests, which is just stunning. And in Seattle, the same thing has happened. And it's no accident that 2 of the 3 trumped up charges that the recall had, 2 of them were related to my solidarity with and participation in the Black Lives Matter movement. And so first and foremost, we did not back down on our explanation of what this attack was about. And then the other thing that really stood out compared to a lot of these campaigns that you mentioned, Toya, where progressives haven't been able to defeat big business efforts to unseat them or to prevent them from being elected, is we went on the offensive. We didn't stop fighting for the things we've always fought for. And one of the most remarkable things happened this year, which is, we've always fought for renters' rights and we have a long track record of winning renters' rights victories. But ironically, in this year, when we were fending off this recall attack from the right wing and from big business, this year became the best year for winning renters' rights victories through our office and through organizing renters. And that shows you that the best defense is a good offense. You go on the offensive for working class people because not only does it inspire working people to get active and help them understand what's at stake, but it also explains to working people as a whole that in fact this is what is needed to change society. And it's not just about fighting this recall, it's not just about winning this or that reform when they're all very important, but it also points the way towards fundamentally what kind of strategy we need. We need a fighting strategy.
Well, and it's great that you were able to expose the fact that if these trumped up charges, these criminal charges are real, then why weren't you facing a criminal penalty for them, And also being able to show that throughout this campaign to defend your seat, it didn't mean that you stopped building movements. It didn't mean that you stopped being a city councilor, a truly working class city councilor, one that's fighting for what your constituents needed, as opposed to making the campaign simply about how to defend your seat. You continued to fight for renters' rights, for example, as you mentioned, which I saw on social media some of the testimonials of some of the tenants, and it was honestly like a tearjerker experience to like read some of the stories and what these people were going through, and how, you were able to continue to fight while fighting off that right wing. So can you talk a little bit more about how, you've mentioned some of the gains that were made throughout this past year for renters in Seattle, but why is it that our viewers across the country and around the world, Kshama, should care about what was happening in one city in the Pacific Northwest of the United States?
I think the main reason why people should care and why this is of relevance to working people and young people internationally, not just in the United States, not just in Washington State, is because what we have achieved in our successful fight against the recall, but also throughout the 8 years that we've been in office in Seattle, is demonstrated what is possible when working people get organized with a very clear-eyed political strategy and leadership from the socialist movement. And as Toya, I'm sure you've mentioned this many times on this show, and as many of our viewers already know, we are members of Socialist Alternative, which is a Marxist revolutionary organization, and the successes that we have achieved have everything to do, first and foremost, with the political ideas that our organization brings and the political leadership that we are able to offer, and the insistence that we bring that movement should be democratically organized. And so the renters' rights that we've been discussing, I mean, none of them would have been won had we not had our socialist Marxist council office, but neither would they have been won had we not understood that it is a question of building the strength of rank and file renters, of bringing the union movement, rank and file union members as part of the renters' rights struggle, and organizing renters building by building. And some of the testimonials you mentioned, I totally agree with you, Toya. I mean, they were really powerful. And it was from renters, working class renters, many of them actually people of color, who experienced through their own journey in this struggle and winning victories, wow, this is actually possible. And so that's what we have offered, which is a real example of winning victories, because this is not just about talking about things in the abstract. It is about actually winning things. And as we know, there is so much to change in this society, and ultimately most of the problems that the majority of working people, billions of people, face internationally, which is housing unaffordability, homelessness, the lack of decent jobs, the lack of healthcare, the lack of access to even basic things like education, none of this is going to be solved under the in the context of capitalism, let alone the question of racism, sexism, and dealing with the climate catastrophe. None of this is going to happen under capitalism. And so we have a dire need of understanding of how those movements can develop and what kind of leadership we need. There's no question that there is huge anger bubbling over in society, and young people today are looking for a way forward. And that way forward, a little bit of that can be seen through our experience. And so I really hope everybody looks at socialistalternative.org and really engages in conversations with us so that we can talk more about what's needed.
And if you're not in the US, that's the International Socialist Alternative. Yeah, I totally agree, Kshama. Like the problems that, we experience in the US, or I experience on the East Coast, you experience on the West Coast, people experience in Australia, they're all similar, and they're all connected because of the global economic system. But I want to focus in on one little aspect of that. I was watching the election night party that you guys had in Seattle, and you had speakers from all over the world. It was really cool to see Mick Barry, who is an elected member of parliament. He's a member of the Socialist Party in Ireland. He was there in solidarity, and it was so awesome to see that. But in your speech, you talk specifically about Marxism and the role that plays. Can you go into that a little bit more in what you meant, and how, others can draw lessons from Marxism when we're trying to fight for a better world?
Yeah, actually, as we were mentioning before, Socialist Alternative is a Marxist or revolutionary organization. And what that means when we say I'm a Marxist, what does that mean? it means that we base ourselves on the ideas of the scientific study of the way capitalism works, and we draw scientific conclusions, and it's those scientific conclusions that lead us to understand that in reality most of the problems facing humanity will not be solved on the basis of a deeply exploitative and divisive system like capitalism. And as long as we have a system that is based that the entirety of the existence of the system is in order to generate a massive and untold wealth for a few at the top, and this is the international capitalist class. You have these kinds of billionaires in every country, including my country, India. So you can't decide this on the basis of race. It is a question of class. So we see a system where a few billionaires, maybe a few more multimillionaires and a few millionaires gain from the system, but by exploiting workers and by exploiting the planet as a whole. And that is why actually we are now facing this existential threat of the climate crisis. And so we understand through our scientific study of capitalism that we need a complete overhaul of the system. And so that's why we are fighting for what we call a socialist society, which is a society based on equality and solidarity. And the only way that can be done is if the resources and the wealth of society are democratically owned by workers internationally. And that is why one of the concrete steps that we need to take, that we recommend as Marxists, that needs to be taken in order to even begin to solve the world's problems, let's say climate crisis, is to take the big energy corporations into democratic public ownership and then retool them by workers deciding to end the use of fossil fuel and going towards clean renewable energy. And the reason we do it, and this is an example of a scientific conclusion, the reason we say this is because we can see from the way capitalism has functioned in the last 20 to 50 years that it's not lack of knowledge about the climate crisis that prevents the billionaires from taking the steps that they need to take. Why are the oil barons, fossil fuel barons, why is Wall Street, why are they not taking the steps that are needed to protect the planet from actual catastrophe? It's not that they lack the knowledge. It's not like they lack the intelligence. It's not like an IQ problem. The problem is that the way capitalism is set up, where profits are generated for a few at the expense of everything else, that system fundamentally incentivizes this kind of a continued practice. And so no amount of knowledge or no amount of pleading the billionaires is going to solve this problem. Ultimately, the only way this can be done is if workers take control democratically of the commanding heights of the economy. So that's the vision we bring, and that's based on scientific conclusions. That in a nutshell is Marxism. But concretely on the ground, when we are fighting for changes around us, whether it is rent control or Medicare for all or $15 an hour or housing affordability internationally, Karl Marx also explained a few other things that are going to be relevant for us. And one of the things he explained was how for the working class to succeed in winning any kind of concrete victories, we need our own political organizations, and that the organizations that represent the interests of the bosses, that represent the interests of the political and business elite, are not going to serve our interests. And that is why from the very beginning, when we ran our first campaign for city council in 2013, we ran as an independent socialist. We were not part of the Democratic Party establishment, which controls the political, sort of the underpinnings of this city. And so there are 8 Democrats on the city council, and I am one socialist, one Marxist. And with that one position, we have completely transformed the political debate in the city, and we made Seattle the first major city to win the $15 minimum wage. But the reason I'm pointing this out is because we would not have been able to do that had we not had our own political organization, which really fueled both the political and the organizational leadership of every victory that we have won.
And, being a part of a political organization is not just, looking to run candidates to be able to do what you do, but it's this whole process that we've been talking about of building movements to fight for things that people actually need, to challenge the status quo, and so that's why it is so important that we are organized as a working class, because the bosses and the capitalists are super organized. In Seattle it's exacerbated considering all those billionaires live there, but you can see just on even a small level in Seattle how coordinated.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's a very important point. The international capitalist class, it's a complex thing. On the one hand, they do compete with one another, and in their competition, they sacrifice the interests of working people internationally. That is absolutely true. And it's also true that at the end of the day, the one thing that they agree on is that they are going to gain and we are going to lose. So if we want to turn the tables on this destructive and dehumanizing status quo for the billions of us, then we have to recognize that they are an international capitalist class, which means we have to be organized as an international working class. And so it's really important that we build this kind of solidarity, and that's why shows like this one are so critical, because we need to share our lessons internationally for the working class's benefit. And I must say, it is so crucial that socialist elected leaders like Mick Barry did from Ireland have been in solidarity with our fight in Seattle, and likewise we are in solidarity with the fight of working people and socialists internationally.
Yes, absolutely. So I have one more question. I know you're busy, you probably got to get going, but I'm sure everybody wants to know, now that we have defeated the recall, what's next? What's happening looking forward? What's going to be going on in Seattle? What are you going to be up to, Kshama?
I think that's really crucial that we discuss, because we another thing as Marxists that we have to learn is that we cannot afford to rest on our laurels. One, because anything we win will be snatched away by the bosses if we let them. As we have seen, we won this election fair and square in 2019. In fact, it was not even fair and square, in the sense that the Chamber of Commerce and big business threw everything against us, including millions of dollars, and still they were not able to defeat us. But then they didn't let it ride there. They didn't say, oh, this was the democratic will of District 3 voters, we're going to let that rest. No, they came after us with the recall. So we should fully expect going forward that this will be far from the final attack against our office by big business, by the right wing. And in fact, we should expect that anywhere movements, whether it's a socialist movement or whether there are labor union victories, social movement victories, we should expect that there will be retaliation and, as we say, reaction from the ruling class. And we should be prepared, before those attacks begin, we should be prepared to fight back.
But when you say attacks, what do you mean?
Well, one of the ways in which the attacks comes is through this, this kind of challenge where they say, oh, you supposedly broke the law, even though it is lies that they're saying, then they'll come after you even though you've won an election. Another way of attacking is what we're seeing, which is really stunning and deeply disturbing, is there are fully 81 bills in Republican-led states nationwide that are targeting peaceful protest movements. And this is clearly a reaction against the Black Lives Matter movement. And so criminalizing of protest movements is something we're going to see. Another example of an attack we're talking about is the way corporations like Amazon, but Amazon is far from the only one, go after union efforts. They carry out, really just almost 100-year-old tactics of union busting, where they target workers who are courageous enough to show the leadership in the union efforts. They will target unions themselves. So though attacks come in those forms, I should also say, though, in terms of your question about what's next, it's also important to understand that one of the ways, and this is one of the most insidious ways that the capitalist system attacks the efforts of the working class, is by co-opting the leaders that come from the working class movement. And so what we've seen over the last 50, 70 years, and this may not be familiar to a lot of young people, because of course most of us who are young workers are not in unions, and so it is difficult to get that kind of experience and have an understanding of labor history. And one of the things that we should recognize is that over the last 50 to 70 years, one of the ways in which capitalism internationally has carried out a relentless attack on working people's living standards, on the victories that we won in the past, is by co-opting a whole section of leaders into being sort of, going away from fighting class struggle based approach to what I would call business unionism and pro-business kind of approach. And we see that a lot in politics as well. Like, for example, in Seattle, the city council is made up either of outright pro-corporate Democrats or a section of woke progressive Democrats who occasionally will say pro-working class things. They'll say Black Lives Matter now. But at the end of the day, they see their job as holding together the status quo for capitalism. They are not on our side, but they look like they're on our side. So that is one of the most insidious ways in which capitalism attacks us. And that's why we need democratically organized social movements. We need democratically organized and militant labor organizing. And we need political organizations like Socialist Alternative that will hold their elected leaders accountable. I mean, one of the things that distinguishes our position from the Democrats is that I take home only the average worker's wage, and the rest of my cushy city council salary goes into fighting for social justice movements, including the strike fund of various labor struggles. And that is one way in which we demonstrate that our elected leaders are not there for their personal careers and for their personal aggrandizement. They are there to fight for the working class, and that is their job 24/7. And if they ever sell out, then we are going to hold them accountable. That is but that only comes from having democratically organized structures, parties, and organizations. So one of the things that Socialist Alternative is calling for in terms of next steps is for working people in America to have a party of our own, and that even though there are differences with the Republicans, the Democratic Party represents not our interests, but Wall Street interests, just like the Republicans. And so that is very important. And in Seattle, we are going to be gearing up to continue to build the fight for rent control. That is extremely important. And I think above all, one of our next steps has to be to learn the lessons of why we won as opposed to why did candidates like Nina Turner lose. Even though they are progressive, even though they had so much support from the working class, why have the squad in US Congress not succeeded in winning anything, even though they have a numerical balance of power? The difference between a fighting strategy, a movement-based approach, versus an approach of paying lip service, but ultimately trying to appease the political elite and big business, there's a chasm between these two approaches. And so to figure out why we need a fighting strategy, I would really invite all your listeners to join Socialist Alternative. If you are in another country, join International Socialist Alternative. Let's build the socialist movement together. Let's build a fighting movement-based strategy internationally.
Thank you so much, Kshama. I totally agree. So I'm going to make sure that in our description below, we put the link to the election night party, because I think it's really inspirational to see, the speakers that you had and to hear your speech as well. And I totally agree. Everyone should join the International Socialist Alternative if you want to join a fight like this. So in regards to our shout out of the week, Kshama, normally we have a shout out of the week where we talk about something that the International Socialist Alternative is doing, but clearly, we need to shout out the work of the Kshama Solidarity Campaign and just the work of the members of Socialist Alternative in Seattle. It's been tireless, having to fight this battle, being forced to fight this battle for an entire year, raising $1 million to be able to do it. It's just, there's so many lessons, like you said, that, can be learned. So hopefully everyone there can take a rest, for the next few weeks and the holidays. And you too as well. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today, Kshama, and hopefully we have you back again real soon.
Thank you so much, Toya. Real pleasure.
This is World to Win. Every Sunday, we broadcast with speakers from across the globe, bringing you the latest news and analysis on the fast-moving global events from a socialist perspective. Subscribe to the International Socialist Alternative's YouTube page and click the bell to get notified when we go live for a new episode. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram, because there's a lot to do and we have a world to win.
When we fight! When we fight!
fight! Solidarity.